that I actually have amazing enemies, because if these folks are mad at my work, then I've done the right thing.
She's the Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who set the country on fire with a project that dared to reframe history.
You know, that this one project was considered so dangerous that had to create an entire bill to try to rescue American history from this single work of journalism.
Nikole Hannah-Jones created the groundbreaking New York Times Magazine's 1619 Project and stood her ground when those in power tried to tear it down.
Wow. I'm sitting here with chills throughout my body.
It's easy to have values when you don't have to live them.
Join hosts Martin Luther King III, Arndrea Waters King, Marc Kielburger, and Craig Kielburger for an uncompromising conversation about hope, democracy, and raising the next generation to know their worth.
I just remember going 15 years of my life feeling inadequate and inferior as a Black girl. What I know for a fact is my daughter has never felt.
Welcome to My Legacy. Today's guest, Nikole Hannah-Jones, is one of the most influential journalists of our time and has changed how this country tells its history. Nikole, we are so honored to have you with us here today. And of course, in the true fashion of My Legacy, we always meet the person who knows you best. Would you mind introducing us to your plus one today?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Nice to meet you all. And my plus one is my husband, Faraji Hannah-Jones, and we have been married for how long? 23 years.
So thrilled to have you with us here today and can't wait to get to know both of you better. But Nikole, if we could start with you, we'd love to understand this incredible journey that you've had on Impact and to take us a little bit back to the origin, because there's got to be a deep, rich part of this origin story of why you became so passionate, maybe a memory from your childhood or your student days that set you on this incredible life trajectory.
I grew up in a house of avid readers. My mom was always very involved in social justice, and so I always had a strong sense of right and wrong, of fairness, and of wanting to root for the underdog. When I was 11 years old, so I read the newspaper every day with my dad. When I was 11 years old, I wrote my first letter to the editor to our local paper. It was about Jesse Jackson's historic run to become the first Black president in 1988, and he didn't do very well. I'm from Iowa, and so we had the first in the nation primary, and he didn't do very well, and I felt he was a great candidate, and one of the reasons he didn't do well was because he was a Black man. So at 11 years old, I wrote a letter to the editor about that, and every day I would go home and look at the paper and open to the opinion section, and then one day they printed my letter. And I just remember even as a middle school student, feeling so empowered by seeing my name in print and knowing that I could see something in the world that I didn't think was fair, and I could write about it and I could make people pay attention to it. So I think that's when I started to think about maybe writing or journalism as something I might want to pursue. Of course, I didn't know any journalists back then, and I wasn't sure what I might want to do, but I think that's where the first kind of kernel of an idea that this might be a career for me began.
I love it, from the early days of activism.
Faraji, we all love a good love story. Can you share how you first met Nikole?
Did you see? I wish the viewers could see how you smiled as soon as when Martin asked that question. You just lit up.
So I would say both of us met actually online sometime in 1999 on a program called AOL Instant Messenger.
That no longer exists.
Our AOL Instant Messenger. Well, basically, it was my name that pretty much attracted the inquiry of Nikole. And so she popped up on my screen one day. And of course, we're all, and these are the early days of the internet. And she pops up on my screen and she says hello. And I'm like, who is this? And the conversation started with, I love your name. Then, of course, at the time I was living in Atlanta. And of course, our conversation progressed more into what we like to do, what we see ourselves doing, those type of things. And then, of course, the phone call. We had a phone call. And of course, I loved the sound of her voice, and she loved mine. And I hope she still loves my voice. But anyway,
I was going to ask, do you still love the sound of it?
I was immediately very attracted to Nikole. And so at the time, she said, "I love Atlanta. I'm moving there." She moved to Atlanta. She actually arrived. We met each other November 1st, 1999. And I was going to pick her up. And I think the agreement we had was, she doesn't like what she sees, she'll walk back into her apartment. If I don't like what I see, I'll drive away. And it was raining that day. So I'm like, I'm not gonna do
Wait. So this is 1999.
There's no social media. There's no way for you to see someone. So I think I like snuck into work late at night and used my office scanner and like scanned a photo of myself. And then he mailed in the mail some photos of himself. But I was always so scared that, like, photos don't actually represent what the person really looks like sometimes. So that's why I was like, okay, when it's time for us to meet, I'm gonna stand outside and you just drive by her slow. And if we don't, you look at me, I'll look at you, and if we don't like how each other looks, I'll go back in the house, or you keep driving, and no harm, no foul. So that it was downpouring rain. I was standing outside with an umbrella. He drove by slowly, and I guess we both liked what we saw because I got in the car.
Drove by my Kia.
Kia, so Kia, yep.
You see Martin's face, he's nervous already. There may or may not have been a time when he had talked to someone on the phone and they were driving past, but he kept driving. He kept driving.
So you understand my strategy.
Now that millions of people are listening, what do you have to say about this?
Sometimes you have to keep driving.
Exactly.
And I'm so glad I did.
Oh, good. You landed on a 10.
Well done.
Yeah. Nikole, you are a young journalist when the two of you all met. And now we'll fast forward 15 years, and you create this truly, truly incredible, ground-shifting issue of the New York Times Magazine, the 1619 Project. And for those that don't know, the project reframed American history by centering the legacy of slavery and the contributions of Black Americans into the narrative of the country. So I am so curious as how did the idea take shape? And what did it take to bring this vision that you had to life?
So I have been obsessed with the year 1619 since I was 15 years old. So I had been bused into white schools starting in the second grade. And so I was part of a small Black population at my high school that was bused in as part of a school desegregation program. And so they offered this one semester Black Studies course with a teacher named Mr. Ray Dow, the only Black man I ever had as an educator. And it transformed my life. Suddenly I was exposed to all of these books written by Black people, all of these books about Black history. I didn't really realize there was so much history that could be taught. I mean, of course, I knew about your father, Mr. King, but as you also know, maybe 5 Black people was I ever really taught about during Black History Month. And so I take this course, and all of a sudden I realized that the history that we had been taught was not even close to all of the history that could be taught, and that people had really intentionally decided that they were going to erase most of the contributions of Black people, not just in America, but in the world. And so I would ask Mr. Dow to give me books to read on my own. And one of the books he gave me was Lerone Bennett's Before the Mayflower.
Mm-hmm.
So that was like a really transformative moment for me as a 15-year-old girl to realize that the history of Black people in this land went back even before the Pilgrims and the Mayflower, and understanding that every American child learns about the Mayflower, but no one thought it was important to teach us about another ship that arrived a year earlier called the White Lion. So Faraji will tell you, as long as he's known me, I've always talked about 1619. And I used to kind of jokingly say my journalism was getting longer and longer and longer, everything I wrote, because I kept trying to go further and further back in the past until we got to the start of it, which was 1619. So as the 400th anniversary of that date was approaching, in late 2018, I just was thinking this most momentous date, that so many Americans still didn't know the anniversary was coming up. And I'm at the New York Times. I'm not a little girl in Waterloo, Iowa anymore. I have the greatest journalism platform in the world. So I wanted to do something really big and substantial, to force a reckoning with that date, and that the institution of slavery is older than the country itself, in here, and that there's few institutions in what would become the United States that predate us deciding to engage in African slavery. So that's when I came up with the idea to pitch a project that would take over the entire issue of the New York Times magazine. And I really didn't want it to be about the past, because the thing that I believe strongly is that past and our unwillingness to grapple with it honestly has shaped this country in so many profound ways that we don't acknowledge. So I didn't want to talk just about the things that we know that slavery shaped. I wanted to talk about all of these areas of American life that have been shaped by this legacy that we don't know. So that was really the idea, but it is something in some way that I have been working towards my entire adult life. That's why I majored in history and African American studies in college. It's why I wanted to be a journalist who didn't just write about the present, but who always wove history into all of my works.
Wow. I'm sitting here with, particularly as a Black woman, with chills throughout my body. And it's so amazing because over these, leading up to this interview, every woman that I've told, every single Black lady that I have said, guess who we're having on the show? They all unequivocally fangirled out. I just hope that you know and understand what you are to our community
Oh
and
man,
how
thank you.
loved you are. And on behalf of all of us, and we have a 17-year-old girl, you all have a 15-year-old, a sincere, heartfelt, from my belly, thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you.
I remember when the first issue came out and people were lining up in New York City around the corner on to get their hands on this magazine. Like, to see that hunger and that desire, people standing in line for that. And it was just truly amazing. But I know that you've said before that you wrote this for your people, for your daughter, and for yourself. And so as a mother, what were you hoping to give your daughter through this work?
I just remember going 15 years of my life feeling inadequate and inferior as a Black girl, feeling somehow that our history was shameful, that the reason that they didn't include us in the literature that we were being taught, in the museums that we went to, in the history books, was because we hadn't done anything. Because surely if we had contributed to society, we would be learning about that. It would be reflected. And so I just remember this constant searching for identity and for some worth, and not ever being ashamed to be Black, but just feeling this kind of emptiness, and not understanding, you know, how our people were somehow different from every other people in the world, that we hadn't contributed great things. And so what I know for a fact is my daughter has never felt that for a day. And that having this project and, the children's book, Born on the Water, which I try to help Black children understand we too have an origin story, and it doesn't begin in a slave ship. I dedicated that book to my daughter because I just wanted her to never have to go up with that sense of inadequacy, that searching for her worth. And I know the beauty of what my husband and I have been able to provide for her, and like the legacy of this book is she knows that. in some ways, I think we do this as parents all the time, is what we struggled with, what we felt was missing. We try to make sure that our children don't experience that. And my child never has.
What we did as parents, as our daughter was growing up, is we were intentional before she got to school, before she was in daycare, to teach her about Africa. Right? To teach her the story of Africa, to teach her the countries, to teach her all of just the history, so that because we knew obviously that she would hear about slavery, and we were intentional that that wasn't her initial understanding of our history of Black people. Not that we have anything to be embarrassed about for slavery, but
That's
for her
right.
to understand. And so I remember once when she went to the Civil and Human Rights Museum here on a school trip in kindergarten, and if you go up to the museum, at the top level is a room of Africa. And so Yolanda stood in the middle of the room and told all of her classmates, and she stretches her hands out, "We all African Americans because
That's right.
because civilization started in Africa." So she was looking at her
Yes.
white friends. It's like, "You're African too."
Yes.
Nikole, so much of what you do is absolutely remarkable, but perhaps one of the most interesting statistics to share with our audience is by the time you conceptualized and pitched the 1619 project, the time it was published was only 7 months, if I'm correct, which is absolutely remarkable. Faraji, this was a question for you. What was it like being beside your partner, your best friend during that journey, seeing her come up with this concept, birth the concept, seeing the intensity, the emotions, and seeing the final product? What was that journey like for her, but what was that journey like for you?
Well, you just used a key word, and that was birthing. That's what this was like. It was like someone who is conceived our second child in so many different ways. And going through all of the emotions of a woman who is pregnant with your child. I had no idea that it was going to be big as it was, but generally when Nikole goes through her process and it feels like it's a burden on her, and sometimes you're catching all the feelings, how moody she is. She doesn't feel like certain things, and she feels pretty much nitpicking and things at the around the house. But I mean, in your heart, it's like, oh, this is gonna be good. Like, this is home cooking right here. I knew every time she's stressing over her projects, I know how impactful it's going to be for the betterment of our people. And so you learn to be much more tolerant because you understand this is important work and it's for the betterment of our people and our community.
I love, because no other podcast, other than having someone with their partner, would get the honesty and the depth and the richness of that conversation. I love it.
Nikole, obviously there was incredible love for this project, but also fierce political pushback. Can you take us into that moment and what it meant to be celebrated and also tragically attacked at the same time?
I knew when the project published there would be kind of a typical conservative outrage. We were trying to unsettle this established narrative of the United States. We, we're trying to be provocative, saying, what if our real origin is not 1776 with these ideas of liberty, but 1619 with the practice of slavery? So I expected, I think when it first came out, Newt Gingrich, called it trash and things like that. And that, I was used to that. But then some months in, it started to change, and no one was more shocked than me that this would be something that the president of the United States, Donald Trump, would spend all this time disparaging, that you would see sitting senators introduce a bill against the project called the Saving American History Act, which actually I take great pride in that. So, that this one project was considered so dangerous that you had to create an entire bill to try to rescue American history from this single work of journalism. So I quickly realized that this was much more powerful than even I could have hoped, that you can measure the impact by the opposition. And that I actually have amazing enemies, because if these folks are mad at my work, then I've done the right thing. And I won't say, it's 5 years out now, so I have gone through some growth periods. I didn't always respond well to it. I this was the most important project of my life. I cared deeply about it. I took so much care, and to see people so flippantly attack it, I really felt I had to be out there defending it at all times. Um, and I realize now that that wasn't necessary. That the project stood on its own. I'm a print reporter. I'm not a TV reporter. I never expected people to know who I was or know my name or to become some sort of symbol. And when you do that, and all of a sudden you become this symbol both to people who love you, but also to people who revile you. And one of the people who reviles you is the president of the United States, who also was stoking violence consistently. Then that requires an adjustment that it took me a while to realize. There was like, I call it like there was some cognitive dissonance, because in my mind, I'm still like Nikole Hannah-Jones that only a few people know if you're real nerdy and you care about school segregation, which is what I was mostly writing about before. But now all of a sudden I was this symbolic person that people were looking at and scrutinizing everything I tweeted, everything I might say somewhere. And that can be a really challenging transition to make. But looking back on it, I just feel, tremendous pride. Like, if Donald Trump was so concerned about my work that he created an entire presidential commission against it, I was doing the right thing. They began to pass these divisive concept laws across the state. In Georgia, you're not supposed to teach 1619. There were certain school boards, Cobb County, other school boards that passed policy that you can't teach the 1619 project. And then they followed it with those anti-critical race theory laws, and then the divisive concept laws, and now the attack on DEI. I contributed to this cultural reckoning that happened in 2020. And maybe I contributed to this racial reckoning that we're having right now in the opposite direction.
And I hope that you are saying that, because let me just be clear, that onus is not on you. The awakening or reckoning that we're going through in this country, which it's in process, is not on you. And learning about our history it's not about collective guilt. It's about collective responsibility.
Absolutely. And let me just be clear, as I do think they would like to blame us for how they have responded to us trying to force a reckoning with the reality of our country. And that's their problem. That's not ours. And I believe strongly that if they believed that the narrative and the truth was on their side, they would just tell the truth.
Faraji, I have a question for you as well. And it's probably challenging to quantify, but what was the most surprising outcome?
I was particularly surprised at some of our public schools that were, going to their school boards and really looking at their historical curriculum, their history curriculum, and saying, look, we need to re-examine how we're teaching our kids history, particularly kids, not just kids of color, but how history is being taught to some of our affluent and white kids. And so you had school systems that really were looking to change their curriculum. And of course, that went with a lot of resistance. The community, churches, I remember when the magazine came out, it was like they did I think a brunch at Sylvia's. It was just a women coming together, talking about the project. I mean, I never seen anything like it. You're looking at an institution that is literally dying. The print industry is dying, and you saw
Don't say
all
that.
things like that. And but you seen for the first time people like literally going out buying a newspaper and reading it. You saw all of these people that were involved in terms of trying to make sure that they can get their hands on the print copy itself, and not just the copy, the whole newspaper, and they were being sold out everywhere. I was extremely impressed by that the most, and how well the community has been able to build a fence around this work, and we're still talking about it five years later, and they're still trying to diminish the work 5 years later. And so I do think that history is definitely on our side, and it will prevail.
We're building something real here, one episode at a time. If you want to be part of it, subscribe. It's free, it matters, and we're just getting started.
Both of my parents and my grandparents, but certainly, they attended segregated schools. So, being born in 1974, I was the first generation of our family to attend integrated schools. So when you walk around and you look and see, history wasn't that long ago.
That's right.
Martin integrated one of the elementary schools here in Atlanta.
That's right.
But another issue that you helped spark a national conversation about was education and segregated schools. And then you've written very powerfully about your choice to send your daughter to a majority Black public school, a Title I school, instead of a private school. And I know that both of you all thought long and hard about that decision. So can you please let us know what was behind that decision, and how did you hope it would reframe the conversation for parents?
My very first job as a journalist was covering the Durham public schools in Durham, North Carolina. And Durham was a majority Black city that still had a substantial white population and had very segregated schools. And I didn't want to be an education reporter. That was just the first job I got. But became very interested in educational inequality, and I started covering that during No Child Left Behind. So I was seeing really the disastrous impacts of a federal policy that was that was punishing these high poverty Black schools for not getting the same test scores as these wealthy white schools, but not providing them the resources that could allow them to actually, compete academically. So I was spending all of my time writing about school inequality, and I just was constantly being confronted with people who were working on behalf of these poor Black schools and were trying to tackle school inequality, and who were lambasting, school segregation. And then I'd ask, well, where do you send your children to school? And not one of them sent their kids to the types of schools that they said they were fighting for. And I just remember, and I didn't have any children at that time. And I just remember being so struck by what felt like a grave hypocrisy to me, that you are arguing on behalf of children that you're afraid to put your own kids in school with. So I kind of made up my mind back then that when and if I had my own child, I was not going to make a similar decision, that I was going to try to live my values. Now, of course, as I have said since then, it's easy to have values when you don't have to live them. So, by the time we have our own child, we moved to New York City when Nadja was 1 year old. And as soon as we moved there, every middle-class parent, Black or white, who had a child would say, "Oh, well, where are you going to send your child to school? You have to figure this out. No, we don't send our kids to the local public schools." And I was like, "My child is 1 year old. I'm not even thinking about that." And that's when I understood it was going to be a test of what were we going to do. So when our child got school age, I talked with Faraji, and I just said, we have to send her to the type of schools that I write about. And in the piece, where I kind of document our educational choice for my daughter, that's actually the cover of it right there. She was on the cover of the New York Times Magazine. I talk about, Faraji and I argued about it. And I understood his concerns. I had the same ones. I understood that there's nothing wrong with Black schools, there's, inherently, but Black schools just don't get the same resources. And that's always been why Black Americans sought integration. It wasn't just because they just wanted to have, they were dying to have their kids sit next to a white student, but there was an understanding that that was the only way we've ever had kind of scalable equality. So I talked to Faraji about it, and he felt, our parents really worked hard to not put us in that educational environment. So why would we, when we have even more resources than our own parents, put our children in our child in an educational environment that we don't have to?
Nikole, you talked about the challenge of that moment where you got to live your values with your child. Like that had to be one of the most emotionally challenging questions. And so, Faraji, I'm so curious to hear your take on this also. But if I could add one part that I think it's so important for our listeners to understand, Faraji, unless I'm mistaken, I think that you have not only chosen to send your child into the public school system, but you are changing the system. You're now a member of the New York City's Community Education Council.
New York school system is the most segregated in the country, according to the UCLA Civil Rights Project.
I didn't realize
I
that.
didn't
So
know
we
that
are
either.
functioning within de facto segregated schools. So with that, that has been the foundation in terms of what we are trying to do is fixed. I myself don't think that our school system needs to be fixed. I think it needs to be transformed. And we have yet to begin to reckon with the historical fact of how segregated our schools have been. In terms of me even disagreeing with where to send my daughter, I thought that the conversation was really important because these are conversations that need to be had. And it was important that people see the conversation that Nikole and I were having. And it wasn't until we organically took the process of actually going into the schools and having real conversations with principals, teachers, and other staff members within the schools to really organically have that conversation where it really hit me in the gut was when I was actually looking in the faces of some of these kids that look like me. We have to understand, even if you are Black parents and you're part of the affluent or the middle class, think about what you are saying in terms of what, if the school is not good for your child, then it shouldn't be good for any of the children that you are that's also attending.
I mean, one, Faraji went from a skeptic to, full on, completely involved in the schools, such an advocate for exactly those type of schools. But I think it's important to say that, one, I think everyone likes to believe that they will be advocates for communities that they're not part of. But I just don't think it often is true. I think you never fight as hard for a community that you don't belong to. And for us, we didn't want to be separate. I think it was really important. My daughter lives such a privileged life compared to anything either Faraji and I grew up with. But we live in Bed-Stuy. She is comfortable around every type of Black person. And that is so important to me. She doesn't think she's better than our neighbors who live in the housing projects. She has been in classrooms for almost her entire career with our neighbors of various economic statuses. And that was really important to us, that we did not raise this Black child who was uncomfortable around most of our Black folks, who could go home with me to Waterloo, Iowa, and fit right in. That was really critical. And the other thing I think that we don't talk enough about is segregation that our students, our community faces now is a race-based, but it is also a class-based. So we talk about how white parents don't want to be in these schools, but middle-class Black parents don't want to be in these schools either. And we have also abandoned our communities. A handful of middle-class parents cannot transform an entire system, but we are in the fight together with our community. And that mom who's working at a fast food job does not have the power that I do. When I go in that school and I say something is wrong as an investigative reporter at the New York Times, they listen to me. It doesn't mean that I care more about my child. It doesn't mean I'm more invested than other parents, but I have more power. And I just have strongly believed that the one kind of unintended consequence of integration has been the abandonment of our poor communities by the Black middle class. And Faraji and I have just decided, both in of educational choices that we've made and where we have decided to call our home, that we didn't want to be part of that. That some of us have to stay in our communities in order to be able to fight with our communities.
I think that's why it's so critically important, too. One of the things that Martin's father said just a few months before he was assassinated is that I fear that in the rush for integration that we're running into a burning
house.
burning house.
That's right.
And it's also important to remember that his very last campaign was Poor People's Campaign.
That's right.
And it was about bringing together Black, white, Native, Latino, all coming together, Appalachian white, looking at the intersection, although they didn't use that term in the 60s, but looking at the connections between, poverty and bringing everyone together.
Absolutely.
It's an incredibly important conversation, and one in which a lot of Black families are having right now. But in December, your daughter had the chance to talk with Vice President Kamala Harris at a Christmas event at the residence. And this question is for both of you. What did that moment mean to you? And of course, we would like to know what she told her.
That moment was probably one of the most important moments of my daughter's life. And maybe she doesn't know it, but I felt that seed needed to be planted in terms of being able to look a Black woman in the eye, sitting in that seat, even in the atmosphere of defeat, and be able to stand and talk to her people, and be able to stand, shake her hand, and talk to her in a way where there was no emotional disappointment. It was more like, here I am, I'm speaking to you, she's speaking to her, she's seeing her in her highest moment. And I felt that's what it meant to me, was for my daughter to see a Black woman, even in defeat, see her at her highest moment, holding her head high, being able to address her, and still be able to celebrate in that moment despite what we're going through in our country.
Yeah, it was a really powerful moment for us all, because, as Faraji said, no matter what the result of that election was, hers was a historic barrier breaking candidacy, and she is and will remain the first woman vice president of the United States. So, and a Howard alum, right? So yeah, in that moment, I had spoken with the vice president about my daughter before. We had talked about not just interest in Howard and my interest in Naja going to Howard, and so she just asked, she asked Naja about Howard. So I was like, yes, keep pushing her that way. And she asked her, what did she want to do? Naja wants to be a doctor. So Naja told her that, and she just told her, to study hard and work hard for her goals. And I think just as a Black girl in Trump's America, having that sort of affirmation in that moment was really critical. And I feel like you all have, I'm sure, done this with your own child, just hearing when you were saying you talked to her about Africa and taught her about the continent, not just been to Ghana twice. I feel like that's so important. And I feel like since she was a young girl, we tried to build an armor around her. We tried to, understand that we needed to shape her perception of herself before she started going out into the world, because the world was going to give her a completely different perception of what a Black girl was and could and should be. So we always tried to build that in her before the world would try to tell her something else. And so to have a Black girl be able to see this proud, strong, amazing Black woman in that position and have a moment with her, to me just affirmed in the biggest possible way everything that we had tried to teach our daughter from her earliest days.
I have one final question. I want to kind of come full circle and go back to where we began, the love story. What have you each learned is at the heart of a true partnership?
As a man who is married to someone who is successful, and I come from a very conservative religious family, to where, the whole scripture or the actual parable saying that the man is the head and not the tail and all of those things, I've learned to shed a lot of those ideas and understand that truly this is a partnership, and truly that the decisions you make are connected to that journey in your relationship, in your family. And I'm gonna tell you, if I had stood in my own way, we would not be where we are today. You will not probably see the 1619 Project if I had been an individual that was an obstacle in the way of my wife. And I will continue to elevate, and I will continue to support the work that she's doing. It is important work, and I will forever be grateful.
Oh, that was beautiful.
Can I say, as a husband, I just hope this moment in the broadcast is when every husband sends that to the other fellow husband to take a listen.
Right, exactly.
Amen. Amen.
So I think that, the biggest thing is compromise. It is forgiveness. It is a willingness to admit when you're wrong. Like Faraji said, true partners, because we really are. What I admire most about Faraji, one, he's just a good person. He's just kind, and he's a good person. I'm in the spotlight, but I could not do the things that I do without a partner who's going to be willing to be at home and make sure the child gets to school, make sure Naja is fed, takes her to her track meets, that is able to be that completely supportive. This man is my biggest cheerleader. I mean, there's never, I have friends where their spouse, and particularly, their husbands are I don't want to say jealous of their success, but they feel some type of way about it. And I've just never had that. Every time somebody meets Faraji, I talk to him later, and they was like, "Man, he was bragging about you." And I appreciate that so much, especially like he said, knowing, he's picked up and moved across the country because I had opportunity. If he hadn't agreed to come to New York, I wouldn't have had the career that I had. And having a spouse who supports your dream and vision, sometimes even at the cost of their own, it's just, it is a rare thing, and I'm very grateful for it.
Nikole and Faraji, your story is beautiful to listen to. Just the two of you together. You make me want to call my wife right now. But more than that, you've shown us that the truth-telling is not only about reclaiming history, but when we talk about your own child, it's about shaping the next generation and what we'll all inherit. When you talk about the pushback that you receive from the highest of powers to judge our success sometimes by how our enemies respond, and live in our values. It's easy to preach it, but it's hard to live it.
I also was particularly moved by just this notion of, I've always heard a wise person say, to not be moved by the praise that you receive, nor the criticism. So the fact that you seem to be so steady in that, I think, is something that I hope that our listeners take away with them. But most importantly, I keep coming back to is love. The love that you all have, first and foremost, for each other. The story of love and partnership is truly beautiful. The love that you have for your daughter, the love that you have for our people, it really shows us the importance of partnership and love, that particularly that highest form of love, that is the remembrance of the fact that we're all interconnected. And once we stand and move forward in that power, that's when we really will see more and more change in our households, in our nations, in our world. So thank you for sharing that part of yourselves with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. New episodes drop every Wednesday with bonus content every Thursday. Don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss a moment.